Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Not Too Comic Book. This being a show where I talk about TV shows that are adaptations of comic books. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of Resident Alien. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. Well, first and foremost, obviously, I like this episode really showcases Harry's kind of jealousy, because it's like, yeah, his whole thing's about eradicating humans, so that's why I'm like, he thinks humans are so lesser than him, his species, this and that, and he's planning on killing all of them, but yet it matters so much to him what other people think, because now he's starting to like, oh, because the new doctor shows up in town, which obviously Harry's not too excited to meet him, which that actor, I've seen him pop up in a few things. I think comic book wise, if I'm not mistaken, he's also the dude, I want to say, isn't the actor's name like Michael Cassidy, I want to say his name is, I could be mistaken. I want to say, doesn't he play Jimmy Olsen in Batman v Superman? I think he dies like right at the beginning, but I think he's Jimmy in Batman v Superman. I could be mistaken. So that'd be interesting in that case, comic book wise. But seen him pop up in other few other things over the years. But I think that's one of the things that kind of pops in my mind immediately. But regardless, tensions and all aside, everyone's immediately latching onto him because it's like, oh my god, he's so smart. And he's like, no, I figured some things out too. Like he wants to feel important. He doesn't like the fact that people are so swimming and stuff like that. Especially what was it, Elaine, or Elaine, the other nurse, being like, yeah, it'd be nice to have someone else nice to look at around here. He's like, someone to nice to look at. He's like, I am what most people would describe as handsome. He's like, even what's the word they've used? What's the modern word? He's like, ravishing. So for him, he's just getting all jealous about everyone kind of swooming over, because obviously, which I even love. It's like, Mike is introducing him. They call me Big Black. And Ben's like, nobody wants it. And then the doctor's like, nice to meet you, Big Black. He's like, finally, someone who gets it. It's like, I don't get what there's to get about people calling you Big Black. I just don't, bro. I just don't. I also love there's also that whole thing about like, oh, like the coffee machine. Oh, you need it fixed? I'm very handy, I can fix it. He's like, nope, I already fixed it. But I thought she just said it was broken. She's talking about a different one. That one's broken, but I'm gonna fix it soon. I'm very handsy. I love that. And but then like also Liv is talking about the pods, which Mike is like, no, that much fitting coffee in that much of a small pod, it's gotta be the devil's work. So I'm just loving the shenanigans of it all. Like I said, I think, once again, Harry's becoming more and more human. Maybe, like I said, maybe just molecularly becoming a human starts changing you on more levels than he recognizes. I think he still thinks he's like, no, I'm still kind of in control of this, but obviously he's still, the human condition is kind of absorbing him more and more, I even love that he's like, yeah, I got to clean out my desk. He's like, but actually I have nothing. He has that briefcase and he just drops it in the trash. And Ben's like, well, thanks for everything you've done. So here's a candle I made of some. He's like, oh, thanks. Pulls the bag out the trash, puts the candle inside it, and then throws it in the trash. I was like, that's super heartbreaking, especially because Ben's like, yeah, I kind of made it. It's kind of something I do as a hobby. It's like, oh, that was like very spitting in his face, but I also love the whole thing about, also, yes, your son doesn't have to go away to the institute. And it's like, wait, you misdiagnosed my son? And it's like, oh, and the new doctor's like, oh, if you need someone to examine him, I can. And Harry's like, no, your son is very, very sick. I've got it figured out. Ha ha ha. You're not a better doctor than me and stuff like that. It's like, oh, which is so sad because you and Max came to an understanding. You, him, and Sahar last episode came to an understanding, but it's just like, just to one up Ethan. He has to be like, no, I've got it all figured out. I'm the one. I'm the best doctor. I'm good for this town, But I even love like Asa being like, well, you're not going to say goodbye. And he was like, I didn't want to. And he didn't think much of it. It's like, because he didn't want to say goodbye because he doesn't want to say goodbye, but he just couldn't. I think in his head, he hasn't quite processed like, oh, he's actually going to miss these humans when it's all said and done. Like he's actually starting to care about them. He does like his life here, because even later on when they're in a bar, she's like, oh yeah, this town is like, you're the only doctor in this town. He's like, yeah. She's like, you do know most people. He's like, you know like everyone in town? He's like, most people. It's like, but he knows people by their diseases and stuff like that. And it's like, oh, that dude over there. And it's like one nut. He's like, has one nut, So, but it shows that he has kind of gotten attached to this town. Like, he's mainly knowing people by what they're coming to him to get checked out for, but it's still a thing of, I think he kind of likes it there, because we don't know the full state of what his home situation is like. Like, obviously he probably has very little reason to go back, as we know his wife's gone. So like, it probably doesn't feel like home anymore. Probably hasn't felt like home. So it might be a thing of he might have been the one that signed up for the mission just to kind of get away from all that. Because we don't know how recent it's been since he lost his wife. So maybe it's fairly recent. So he might have jumped on this assignment immediately just to kind of get away from home. And it's like, I'm going to do my duty, but it also gives me an outlet not to think about it. But obviously he was missing home. Obviously, he's mainly been talking more recently about completing his mission, and obviously he felt, and was missing home. But now it's like he's not talking as much about going home afterwards. It's mainly just, I'm gonna blow up, I'm gonna destroy, kill all the human life on this planet, and then go. But it doesn't necessarily, it's not just a continued thing of, I'm gonna go home. It's just like, that's all he's focused on. So I'm wondering, has he really thought about much after he's wiped out humanity? Because I even love it later on. He's like, because he even said I'd have to, I'd be if, I forgot what the wording he was using, but basically it was like, if people saw me flying around in my airship, like I'd have to beat women off with a stick. Just him getting the metaphor wrong, but basically he would, the women would be so swooming about just how cool I am, because he thinks he's so cool. But then also it's like, once I do that with my ship and when I destroy everyone, they'll realize how much better I am than Ethan. But then he's like, how can I show them when they're all dead? He's like, I'm going to have to work on that one. Once again, showing you how much of a dork he is, that he doesn't have it all figured out. It might be kind of a similar thing to Venom from the movie Venom, how Venom's kind of I'm kind of a loser on my planet. What if Harry's actually the loser? A more appropriate because he's an alien too, so it still is apt in that description. But another one would be Invader Zim. He might be the Zim of his species when you think about it. Zim is the one everyone's just do whatever, send Zim whatever, we don't care. He just ruins everything. So he might be I can't believe it took me till episode 6 to compare to see Invader Zim. To be fair, I haven't seen Invader Zim in years, but still, it's damn, dude. Of course, he's literally Invader. He's literally Invader Zim. So he might be the loser of his species, and that's why they sent him on this mission. They were probably he could probably potentially go off and die. Who cares? He's sacrificial. He's replaceable. He's not that. We don't know. Like I said, I'm just throwing it out there because that's just kind of a funny thought to think about. If he ends up being the quote unquote loser, like I said, the Invader Zim of his species. Also, I really like that moment, because obviously for Isabel, it's now that Harry's done as a doctor here, it's we can go back to New York, which I even love, when him and Asta are hugging, it's and she's like, oh, there's your wife. He's like, if we run now, she can't catch both of us, or something like that. But Isabel's like, oh, now that you've done here, we can go back to New York, which she's like, I don't want to go back to New York. He's like, I don't love it there. She's like, what's one thing not to love about New York? And he was like, 9/11. And she was like, well, there is that. It just, I was like, Jesus. It's nobody loved that. So it just that response just caught me off guard, because I was like, I guess you studied enough human history. Oh, that was also another thing that kind of struck him against Ethan, where it's oh, maybe he's not too bad, and it's oh, Law and Order. I didn't know people still watched it. He's like, I could never get into it. He was like, you son of a bitch. It's don't talk shit about my Law and Order. Because I also love that he was I think he has more teeth than me. His smile makes me kind of want him, makes me want to hug him and strangle him at the same time. Harry's feeling all kinds of feelings, and I love that it's also oh, Darcy, me and Darcy were friends before you were so, haha. And it's Asta has to be well, you both can be her friends, and Darcy's shut up, let them fight. She's really enjoying it, because it's she likes kind of being the center of attention in between them, and it turns into a whole oh, let's arm wrestle type of situation. And it's oh, we don't have to do something. Me and Harry were doctors. We were kind of above childish things. And Harry, I was oh, how are you going to do this? And Harry uses his super strength. It ends up breaking Ethan's arm, but they have to kind of dislocated it, but then they relocate it. I'm and he's woo, why is no one cheering for me? Yeah. Obviously also the whole thing with Darcy too, where she was, it's oh, she has to because she's buddy with Isabel, but obviously Isabel doesn't know about the whole Darcy and Harry thing. And obviously Harry doesn't correlate any of this, because he doesn't really know how Darcy feels about him. And I think there's a lot more to it than that, because especially later on when Darcy wakes up and she finds out she's at Ethan's place, and it's oh boy. And then like, it's like, oh, it made you breakfast and everything. He's like, oh, you're kind of awesome. She takes the breakfast and bounce. Either it's because she doesn't like that. It's like, oh, you want to kind of make it be kind of a serious thing. And I don't think she likes that. Or is it because on some level she does like Harry more that maybe she doesn't quite recognize it? It's just interesting. Like, it might just be like I'm not into commitment type of thing. I'm into having fun. You know, obviously she jokes about the whole thing of like, oh, I can't wait to find my next ex-husband. But I think this might be implying that she might like Harry more. And it's just like hooking up with Ethan was kind of like, that was fine and dandy. But, you know, I think it is a thing that she does like Harry more. But she feels a little complicated. It's complicated because of the whole Isabel thing of, hey, you kind of help get them back together. You kind of help solidify that. Plus, I'm sure it's a whole thing of like, oh, I was technically trying to hook up with a married man. I'm sure that's, you know. I don't know. I'd like to know kind of what goes through Darcy's mind a lot of times. This episode also made me think about, too, we don't actually know what Darcy does. Because we had seen this previously in an episode when Harry was on the mountain. Like, obviously, they're throwing dynamite. I think they do that specifically. Either they're trying to, like, look for something, or it might just be, like, their job. So I don't know. But maybe it's, like, they clear the mountains so that the mountains don't, like, avalanche every once in a while. So maybe they have to kind of do that, kind of cause smaller avalanches so it doesn't build up and cause massive avalanches later. Maybe that's what it is. Because Darcy later on pops up and it's like, oh, you need to be careful in this area. Like, I don't know. Like, they've never specified exactly what she does besides the whole bartending thing. It's just like, so I'm curious what that's about. Maybe like if you're from Colorado or maybe like mountainous places with a lot of snow like that, that's kind of like, oh, that's obviously this. But for me, I'm like, I have no idea what that's supposed to be. They haven't bothered explaining it within the confines of the show, you know, so. One of my other favorite parts of this episode, obviously, having gotten the tip from Harry trying to, you know, say like, oh, I've got stuff figured out about this case. You know, oh, I've solved this murder by bringing up the whole stolen med pad, description pad. And Asa kind of informs him about the party. And it's like, oh, yeah, there's that one kid who's potentially selling them. So he... they go investigate, and I love it. It's like, all right, we're gonna have to do this whole good cop, bad cop situation, and then you have Liv being like, yeah, right, we have, you know, a dynamic duo, and he's like, all right, so I'll be good cop and bad cop, and the moment he said that, I'm like, what the hell is she gonna be then? And he's like, you're gonna stand out here and guard, and he goes inside, and I love the whole thing, hey, we're just gonna have a friendly conversation. He's like, except there's one problem, we're not friends. What was it? You bitch ass shit nugget or something like, I forgot. I latched onto it. Oh, dude, I was like, wow, 0 to 60 like that. And I love the whole like, so what's the difference between Tinder and Grindr? I was like, oh, these are very different, very different. So good. You know, if you get hit with a phone book, it won't leave any marks, but I don't have a phone book. And he's just looking at him. I'm like, he is legitimately crazy. And that kid is just standing. I even love it during the whole Tinder bit. The kid's just leaning over, looking to his phone. That character literally has no dialogue. He's just sitting there the entire time, just taking it. I love he's coming back. Mike's like, kid didn't break. Come break him. That kid might as well work for the CIA. I've never seen anything like it. But it turns out Liv is the one that, you know, talking to some other people. It's like, oh, I was able to get some information. He was like, oh, yeah, that's exactly why I told you to stand behind. You know, I was like, yeah, I'm thinking that, you know, 6 moves ahead. And she's like, ha. And with the information is like, ha. Yeah, it's just like, oh, you're playing chess while everyone else is playing checkers. Okay. And he's like, ha, checkmate. And she's like, you know, or check, but okay. And so they also look into the Asta thing of that. Well, in particular, it comes up that like, whoa, Jay works at the pharmacy. I mean, at the office too, and she could have access to the pad. So it's like, why didn't Asta include her amongst the suspects? Obviously, she's not going to suspect her daughter, but obviously only certain people within the confines of everything knows the truth. Not everyone does. It's not public knowledge in the town, because I think eventually it's going to come out, and when it does, it's going to lead to a whole bunch of issues, I'm sure. But it's also going to be like, oh, are you covering for your daughter? So I'm sure like finding out that Jay is actually her biological daughter is probably going to complicate things on their front, because it's going to be like, because the argument might turn into a thing of maybe Asta did it to like cover the fact that she didn't want Jay to know the truth, and maybe the suggestion might be like, oh, Sam was hoarding it above her head or something like that. I'm not saying that's what's going. I mean, I'm suggesting that might be a motive they try to attribute to why she might be a potential suspect with the whole thing. I don't know. Or maybe they might say that might be Jay's motive, and she found out like, oh, Sam had kept this big secret from you, and you just wanted to make him suffer, in pain. Because even, or later on, because obviously they find out the poison that was used on Sam, and obviously we find out in this episode also, oh, he's diabetic. So Liv kind of suggests that maybe whoever did it knew him well enough to kind of slip the poison into his insulin, making it a ticking bomb, because whoever did it didn't necessarily have to kill him that night. They could have set that up well in advance, so they have no idea when that could have gotten poisoned. It could have been any number of people. Because Mike is actually looking at what Liv was able to make. She was like, what? Oh, no, I just came in the closet. This isn't a murder board. It has nothing to do with Sam's murder. But it says Sam's murder. And she's like, right. And she kind of gave out her theories. And you could tell he was a little, like, taken aback by it, because he was like, oh. Because I think he felt bad because, like, he wants to be the top cop. He wants to be top dude. Like, he wants to be hot shit. And it turns out, oh, I'm not that great. Like, the fact is like, oh, good job, deputy. I wouldn't be surprised if we see him kind of taking credit for her success. We'll see. But I think that moment kind of put him in, like, he kind of was like humble in that moment. So that's why I was almost like, oh, it seemed like she might have accidentally put him in his place in that moment. And because that's why this whole bravado is all for, because he feels insecure. Once again, I referenced it last episode of just like his interactions with his dad. It seems like that's kind of where his insecurities stem from. Maybe there's other extenuating circumstances as well, but still, I was like, that's fascinating. So, like I said, I'm curious. I get the feeling, considering his personality, Mike is going to try and take credit for her discoveries and not going to give her any credit, but we'll see if he does something dickish like that or not. Another aspect of this episode I really thought was interesting is like Harry keeps drugging Isabel, because I'm like, Jesus, because that can't be good, because at first it's like, oh, he knocks her out. He's like, yeah, sleep for a while, or don't wake up for a while, or never. And then later on, she's like, oh, I'm so groggy, what happened? He's like, oh, go ahead, drink up. And then she goes in the other room, he's waiting, and there, thud goes the body. So it's like, that can't be good for her. Like, I mean, I'm sorry, being drugged in general, it's not. But, like, I'm sure that's definitely not good from her, especially because both times she's thudded pretty hard against the floor each time. I was like, I mean, it's sad too, because it's like, well, I mean, I think there's probably, because I also love that when he was trying to drug her, like the first time, like he was saying the whole thing of like, oh yeah, like what I'm going to do to you. It's super detail I latched onto, but why specifically her left boob? He was talking about, oh, he was going to like caress it or whatever. He's like, in particular, the left one. And then also like, I will get engorged and stiff, and then I will thrust fast and then slow. I'm like, and it's like, oh, I was like, is she going to really like this? Is this kind of like, obviously it's supposed to be kind of like sexy talk, but he doesn't know how to do sexy talk. Oh, but then she immediately passes on. Oh, interesting. Because I thought the whole reason why he cooked breakfast, fixed her coffee and everything, didn't know it was a setup just to kind of remove her from the equation for a bit. I thought it was him just trying to prove a point by being like, oh, I can be romantic. I'm awesome. I'm better than Ethan in every single way possible. Thought that's what they were setting up, but it's like, obviously he had ulterior motives. He needed to find the last piece of his ship. Still needs to find his actual device. So I also like finding out that Asta, Liv, Darcy, and their friend are all on the bowling team together. I was like, oh, that's I don't know if that came up earlier. Like, it seems like all four of them are pretty tight. It seems like that was kind of like a high school thing, because they referenced like a sophomore thing, and she's like, yeah, I can't like help you guys assault people anymore or something like that. So I'm like, oh, so you guys have known it. I mean, it's a town where everyone kind of grew up, around each other. So I was like, oh, but I didn't realize you guys were like that tight knit of a group. I was like, oh, that's pretty dope. But obviously Liv is the one that was kind of suggesting to Asta that whoever did this had to be someone she was pretty close to, and that leads to her confronting Jimmy, because she thinks Jimmy's the one that stole the past. And she's like, I can see it all over your face. He's also got that woman with him, Becky, and Asta's trying to tell Becky, like, hey, like, he'll make it seem like it's your fault, but it's him, you don't deserve it. Because it's like, but you can tell the look on Becky's face, like, it's almost like because I was wondering what she's going to be like. Because that situation could have gone multiple ways. It could have easily been a, what? Oh, like, I heard what happened to you guys. That would never happen to me. That it's not like that. Jimmy's not like that with me. It could have been that situation. But the look on her face makes me think, sadly, what was happening to Asta is happening to him, too. I mean, just because, you know, he's with a new person doesn't mean he's not going to treat Becky the same way he treated Asa. You know, it might be like him treating all women in his life like that. So, but the look on Becky's face made me think like, yeah, because obviously there's a whole bit between the bowling crew about it being like her being like a Russian mail order bride. But the friend was like, oh, I didn't record that. And Darcy's like, oh, can we do that again so we can record that? You know? So there's that side of things. Another interesting development in this episode too was the whole situation with the government side of things. We finally got insight into that. Our opening once we got 50 years ago in Maine, which obviously shows that this isn't the first time a species from their planet has come here. Makes you wonder why, who's to say they haven't popped in and out over those 50 years, but what made them come there the first time? Like maybe that was a reconnaissance mission, and then now they're ready to strike, so maybe that's why Harry's finally here. But we had that little girl and her dad at the lighthouse, not ironically, interestingly enough, watching Lost in Space. That's what they were watching on TV. Which also, if you've never seen the reboot that they've got on Netflix, I highly recommend. I think it's a really neat science fictional show. But regardless, going into its third and final season, which is supposed to come out sometime this year, went on a little bit of a tangent there, but I was just like, oh, Lost. Like the moment I heard Danger Will Robinson, I was like, oh, Lost in Space. Okay, cool. Very, very befitting in its own right, because that's about space travel and aliens to a certain extent. Kind of to a full extent, actually. I'm sure you actually break it down, you can draw a lot of parallels to Lost in Space to this in many different regards. Well, sitting here more. I was about to say I'm wondering I haven't read too deeply into it. I'm wondering, is Lost in Space is that just kind of like a wink and nod of just like, oh, we wanted something kind of similar to kind of like feature on TV, especially something older, since we're going back in time, that would kind of fit around that time frame, that could tie and fit not necessarily tonally, but just the nature of the show could fit very naturally with the nature of what Resident Alien is. Regardless. But we saw the little girl, and obviously there's the general, who's played by Linda Hamilton. I saw her name, I was like, what? That's crazy, because I brought this up because I literally just saw Catherine Zeta-Jones in Prodigal Son yesterday. Well, technically 2 days ago, because I'm recording this like Thursday morning. Well, this will be coming out in a couple hours. But it's just interesting. I was like, holy, I just saw Catherine Zeta-Jones, I'm seeing Linda Hamilton, which obviously the thing Linda Hamilton is probably best known for is Sarah Connor from the Terminator movies. So, but still, it's just like, I saw her name, I was like, what? And she's the general and everything. She's the little girl from the beginning. So I'm assuming she spent her entire life trying to prove that true, because probably no one believed her. Probably no one believed her dad from what they saw. So she's in a government position because she knows that, like, if any of this information gets to some top brass in the government, they're just going to bury this. So she wants proof so that, I think for her own sake and maybe her own dad's sake, just to prove, like, it's real. It wasn't in our mind. We weren't crazy. So she's the one that sends out the assignment because the lieutenant and the lady that's supposed to be his pretend wife. It is kind of messed up. It's like, oh yeah, like, so we broke up. Yeah, you broke up with your girlfriend through text. Kind of messed up. It's like, oh, I guess it makes sense, because she would be asking too many questions if he's like, oh, I got to go on this mission. It's like, this is supposed to be off the book. So it's just kind of messed up. Obviously, I like the bouncing back and forth between time, because we ended up finding out, like, they ended up finding Harry's ship, because it roughly kind of where it landed, and it was in New Mexico 2 weeks ago. Then a week ago, the general sees the ship, and obviously it's a little different it's similar, but obviously different from the ship she saw all those years ago. But it's just kind of like that look of relief on her face, like, yes, I wasn't crazy. It's real. Okay. So now we got to find the alien that's piloting this. So when the time does come, though, like Harry, like, after knocking Isabel out again, he decides to go, just take that piece back to his ship. But obviously they have his ship. It was really interesting. Obviously, his fake wife shuts him up, but it would have been interesting to find out, like, explain, like, how that whole thing works. It's like, basically, it seems like a black light ends up helping them see, like, for whatever reason, it's able to break through the the invisibility of that ship. Like, they were about to go into explanation. It's like, oh, just shut up. It's like, nah, that would have been an interesting. I'm not the most well-versed science dude, but that still would have been interesting to find out like exactly how that works. Because I'm wondering on some level, could that necessarily apply to Harry as well? It's a different thing, but obviously we know there's like a genetic thing that lets 1 out of 1,000 people see him for what he really is. So, makes you wonder if there's going to be an correlation. But at the end, it's like, oh, like we see people roll up and they're about to take Harry. So I'm curious what he's going to do. Is he going to reveal who and what he really is? Or is he just going to be like, oh, I was just some schmuck. I found this ship and I'm cute. Well, because he also has a piece of his ship on the back of the truck. So I'm like, are they going to find out what Harry are? Are they going to take him? Are they going to ask him questions? Like, I'm so curious to see where that goes. Because Harry could take them, but also he's surrounded. There's people far away. Sniper rifles and stuff, so it could get nasty, but like he might be able to squirm his way around it. But now it's going to be a thing of, damn, there are people who are aware of me and they also know about me. They actually have my ship too, so this jeopardizes my entire mission. It's going to be, like I said, a really nice cliffhanger to kind of end this episode on. So I'm really curious to see where ultimately all this ends up taking us going forward into the next episode. But really, that's all I want to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.